Hello and welcome to Drive-In Double Feature Podcast. I'm Nathan.
I'm Ryan.
And this is the podcast where we talk about 2 movies a week, every Tuesday and Thursday. And before we get into this very special Tuesday episode, we have a Patreon. And if you want to help support the show, maybe recommend a few things, listen to some special episodes over there, you can check us out and donate $5 and support us with $5 a month over there at patreon.com/driveindoublefeaturpodcast. But this movie this week is Dr.No. Yes, that is the first James Bond movie, the very first 007 movie from 1962. It's another anniversary, kind of. Just in October, it's going to be on its 60th anniversary. It's going to be a 60-year-old movie. So look at that. We always time these things perfectly, and we don't even try to.
Somehow it always works out.
Yeah, but yeah, this is a new series we want to do. We want to cover a James Bond movie every so often, kind of go through this entire franchise. But Dr.No, the very first one from 62. Have you ever seen this one before?
Oh yeah, my dad loves all the James Bond movies, and that's like as soon as I was able to like comprehend stuff, like when I was like 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever, he's like, we got to watch all the James Bond movies. He's a firm Sean Connery guy, by the way.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, I was going to ask you anyway, what your experience with James Bond was, if you had a favorite Bond, anything like that.
So, I mean, James Bond is always been, my dad always loves talking about him. And one episode of I probably will talk to him at some point because he was alive before James Bond existed, which is crazy to think. And so like I was just wanting to hear like his thoughts and opinions on like, did you know what James Bond was before going to the theater or what, you know, or that kind of thing. But no, I've always liked a lot of James Bond movies. My favorite one is actually Goldfinger.
Nice. Okay.
But I like a lot of them though. I will admit I haven't seen all of them. I'm missing like one Roger Moore and all 2 of the Timothy Dalton movies. So I'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I wanted to get into. So I really like James Bond, but I haven't seen all the movies. I haven't seen all the movies from every actor, and I wanted this as an excuse to kind of delve into that. My first exposure to James Bond was actually was video games, GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. An absolute classic of a game. And yeah, that's how I got exposed to it. And I think the first James Bond movie I ever saw, and this might show my age, was actually Casino Royale. Because my family, no, and that's because, my parents didn't really grow up with James Bond. My grandma, I remember talking about wanting to watch James Bond, and she said those movies are dumb. So, you know, I didn't really have much of a James Bond family, but I saw Casino Royale. I thought it was incredible. And I remember going to the local library and picking up some DVDs. And I picked up like Moonraker. I picked up, I think, GoldenEye, and I picked up Goldfinger. And I remember hating Moonraker, and I'll see how I feel about that later on. That was many, many years ago. But no, ever since then, I was really interested in James Bond and getting into that whole franchise. It feels like a film fan's franchise. Like if you're a movie person, you have to have seen at least one James Bond from every era at least.
Well, it's one of those that there's so many movies. It's like almost shocking if somebody would tell you I haven't seen at least one. You know, like some people are like, oh, I haven't seen one Star Wars movie or whatever, which, you know, there's only like 9 of those, but in James Bond there's like 3 times as many. So it's like it's really hard. It would almost be like I'm going out of my way not to watch one of these movies.
Exactly. Yeah, especially even like the modern ones, right? Because those make tons of money. And
I mean, it's one of those where it's like, you know, everyone always says like, what's your favorite, who's your favorite Bond is what they always say. Not like, because it's like, if you grew up in the 60s, Sean Connery was your guy. If you grew up in the 70s, early 80s, Roger Moore was your guy. 90s, Pierce Brosnan, and then now the 2000s, 2010s. Yeah, Daniel Craig. So it's kind of like one of those movies that it kind of evolves as time moves on. It's like it gets like from like the 60s, the 70s, like there's like an aesthetic from each decade.
Yeah, I think each of them embodied their decade, and I'm really excited to delve into that as we go. And I guess that brings us into our movie, Dr.No, which kind of embodies the 60s. I think like Sean Connery's James Bond embodies, or like even like changed 60s culture in a way. And so this is just getting into like how this came into being. I guess this is not Ian Fleming made the character James Bond and has a book series, and Dr.No actually isn't even the first book in the series. It wasn't even their first the first book they wanted to make into a movie. They actually wanted to make Thunderball into the first movie, but this was a very big gamble. They didn't know if this was going to be a hit or not, so they went with something like Dr.No, which primarily only has one location, can be filmed on a smaller budget, and they can put a little less money into it.
And actually, Dr.No was not the very first on-screen portrayal of James Bond. There was actually a television movie version of Casino Royale, not the comedic one with Peter Sellers, but there was actually one that actually predates that from like the late 50s. But it was pretty uninspiring. Like nobody really cared, that sort of thing. And Casino Royale is the first book in Ian Fleming's series. And like you said, the reason why they went with Dr.No is because there really wasn't, like, they were in one city throughout the whole thing. There isn't the sets in there. They didn't need a whole lot of different sets for the movie. So it was real cheap to make, which is so funny to consider, like this movie being a low budget movie, like James Bond and a low budget movie, like in the same sentence. That doesn't seem like something that should be at all.
And I mean, as soon as this movie became the hit that it was, that was definitely never really going to happen again. This was a huge franchise, and I mean, it was hugely popular, and like we'll go into it a little bit, how it even like changed some of culture and everything. But what I like about Dr.No, so the first time I watched Dr.No, I liked it, but I didn't love it. It's not the action-packed Bond that you would come to expect. It's very slow. It is more of a spy movie than James Bond kind of evolved into action. This is mainly just a spy movie, and I like that a lot. Actually, I think it's a really cool intro to the James Bond franchise.
Right, I was gonna say that too. I mean, there's a not. Because when I was younger, I didn't appreciate as much because Goldfinger, there's a lot of action in that one, but this one, there really wasn't those common James Bond tropes or anything like that. This one was kind of like you said, like this movie, it was, it's kind of like a murder mystery kind of, where he's trying to figure out how this one agent stationed in Jamaica died and who killed him. And he's kind of questioning all these different people. And it's more of a spy movie more than anything. It's not an action-packed movie. It's complete espionage.
Yeah, completely espionage. And I'd understand if somebody would think this is boring. I think it's a movie that you would appreciate more once you've seen more James Bond movies. Like, let's say you're like, I want to get fresh in James Bond, and you started with this one. You might not like it, but you would appreciate it more. I feel like that's kind of what I get out of it. I appreciate it a bit more.
You know what I do? You know what I think I do like a lot about this movie too is that this is the very first James Bond movie, but it's not treated like an origin story either. It's just like he's a spy and he's James Bond. They don't make a big deal of like explaining what MI6 is or like how James Bond became a spy or anything like that. It's just kind of like this is what he does. And because I just think now, like, every time they do a a new Batman movie or like a new Spider-Man series, it's like we got to do the origin story, or like we got to show our version of the origin story. And audiences, I think, get bored of that because we've already seen it. We get it. We don't. It's really unnecessary. And this one, like I said, it's just kind of says, here it is right here. Nope. No explanation.
Yeah. His intro is very simple, very, very cool. And then you kind of just get into it and you get introduced to M, Moneypenny, the whole cast, just like, like they know each other. And if this movie, if they tried to start this up recently, exactly, it would be like, oh, hi, Moneypenny. And then like, this is our first time meeting. How's it going? Like it would be a very drawn out how everybody met. Kind of like how James Bond goes with meeting Q in those new movies. Not saying that was bad or anything, but they have to introduce like, oh, this is how they met in a way.
Yeah, and that one's more of a soft reboot, I guess, kind of, because Moneypenny appears for the first time, and Q, and how they get an M and everything. But, they reuse a lot of the same characters. Like M is the same from the 90s. So,
yeah.
But this one, like I said, they give you like a little bit of backstory about Bond. Like he lives like real lavish lifestyle and real ladies man. Just that one woman like shows up when he's supposed to be leaving to go to Jamaica, and he's like, I have to leave right immediately. And she's like, when do you have to leave? And she starts kissing him. He's like, almost immediately. And then
yeah, classic Bond, the ladies man. And I mean, you get that right from this. Oh God, that scene is so iconic. I love watching it, of James Bond introducing himself. He does it in the first movie where he says Bond, James Bond, and just introducing himself almost to the camera. It's so cool. Sean Connery is great.
I don't know. I think it would have been better if he said, hi, my name's James Bond. What's your name?
Yeah, or he had like one of those Bond name tags on and the camera zoomed out on that.
James
or something.
Bond, how you doing?
Yeah, that would have been even better. I guess you're right.
But they did explain that, like, that's the timing of the way so I listened to the audio commentary that was with my Blu-ray of this movie, because I have the whole box set on Blu-ray, not to brag or anything, but
whoa.
There is an audio commentary throughout, and they did say like the way he said James Bond, the timing of it was really deliberate. He says Bond, flicks this lighter, James Bond. So it's like a little timing to it. Like they knew it was going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and you can feel it. Something else I like about this one is that it starts with a cool James Bond title sequence. That's not something that like evolved or anything, like, oh, later on it was there from the beginning. This one's not as strong as others. It's a lot of like color lights, like almost just lighting around to name off the names, but you really didn't see that very often back in those days. So it was a very big deal.
It's a blueprint for a lot of future theme songs and intros, but it's still really good. I mean, it's the classic Bond theme, because this is the first time we're hearing the Bond theme, and James Bond does like the classic walking in front of the scope, and then he turns and shoots, and you see the blood rush down the screen. So, I mean, it's so common. I think now it's kind of commonplace because we see it so much. But if we were watching this movie for the first time or had no context about who Bond was, I would probably be like, "Whoa, that's really cool." And so,
and the James Bond theme, first time hearing it, and even now I still think it's really good, but the first time hearing that, I'm sure was great, because it's excellent. It really is just like an iconic song. I'm saying that word a lot, but it is that song is just crazy good. And I guess that's one thing. This movie doesn't really have like a title song like the rest of them. It kind of does. It has the song Three Blind Mice.
But it's a Jamaican like island version of that song.
Yeah, and it leads into the movie. Like it literally is like part of the context of the intro of the movie. And I never see this one ever really talked about when you look up the best Bond songs or like a list of all the Bond songs, because I don't really think it is one.
Well, I mean, the Bond song and this movie is the theme song, really.
Honestly,
And
yeah.
so, I mean, if anything, that is the best one because it's used in so many other movies.
Yeah, it's used in all of them. Or at least I think. Well, maybe not the non-Eon ones, which we'll get into later on. But no, yeah, and yeah, I guess getting into the movie, like we said, Sean Connery introduces himself and he gets sent on a mission to Jamaica. We meet Moneypenny and M, and they're pretty much out of the movie really fast. They don't really come back.
So they kind of explained the role of Moneypenny for the movie. Like Bernard Lee, they said was really good for the role because it's just kind of real matter of fact. Kept it very British like. But they interviewed the actress that played Moneypenny, and she was saying that she kind of had it in her head, like because they're kind of playful with each other, her and James Bond, and they were. Like she kind of had it in her mind, they kind of acted it where James Bond and Moneypenny did have like a little love affair at one point, or like a little like one night stand type of deal. And they just kind of had like that real flirtatious, playful manner. And Moneypenny kind of knows like she can't fall in love with James because he's a spy and she'll probably break his heart or whatever. And James Bond, doesn't want her to get in the way of his work type of thing. So it works really well, and then their dynamic is explored a lot. They have a lot of great chemistry together because it does seem that way, like they are kind of like this real flirtatious manner. And it's so funny because like we said, we don't this is the first movie, but even like like when James Bond's leaving, he's about to have another conversation with Moneypenny. He's like, okay, try and skip the pleasantries, Bond, get to work.
Yeah, it's very in and out, but they at least get that nice moment. Like you said, they have a good chemistry. I think Sean sits on her lap and they kind of just playfully banter with each other. And it's fine. But yeah, like you said, it's just like, okay, get over there. And then James Bond lands in Jamaica. And I guess that was the first thing they filmed was him landing in Jamaica.
Yeah, that was the very first thing they did. And they said that was the very first shot of any James Bond movie ever. And the lady taking his photo in there was she was from Jamaica. She was actually a flight attendant at the, because she has like a pretty, not a super prominent role, but she has like 2 or 3 scenes in the movie.
Yeah.
And they said she was like they were on their way to Jamaica to shoot, and they were just like, oh, do you want to be in our movie? And she's like, oh, get on the plane, sir. Like, we gotta get this flight moving. And they're like, no, really, we want you in our movie. And she's like, I've never acted before, and they just put her in there, and then she's in one of the biggest movies to ever be made.
Yeah, right. Like it was going to be a huge hit, had like some non-actor and in a pretty. I mean, she leaves the movie, but she has a few scenes. She acts. I watched some of the original trailers for this movie. They have her in the trailers, and I guess you could consider one of the earliest Bond girls, right? Because this movie, I mean, you have one main Bond girl, but there's actually a few women that pop in and out of this movie, like doing whatever.
He sleeps with at least 3 to 4 women in this movie.
There's a lot of sleeping. That's another big deal for a movie from this era. There is, I mean, doesn't show explicitly any sex, but there is a lot of sex going on.
Well, that was the other thing too. It was like a big deal at one point because they were in the same bed together and they were an unmarried couple. So.
Yes, yeah, and because that's a huge deal. But I guess in America, Hollywood, that probably would have never been made, but because that was made in the UK, I'm sure they were able to, push it just a little bit.
Sure. One thing I do want to add, though, I mean, this movie is primarily in Jamaica. Bond is in a suit throughout most of it, and I was just thinking, like the whole time, I'm like, he must be like an agonizing heat, having to wear a suit the whole time.
Right, I'm sure that is awful. Like I think for the most part in the beginning of the movie he's in a suit, and wouldn't that like scream like I'm a spy or something, walking around a suit in Jamaica?
Well, yeah, it does originally because he does go and question one of the boatmen who turns out to be working for, I guess, the CIA or whatever with Felix Leiter, who's another common character that pops up in a lot of movies. But
Yeah.
I mean, he grows up like, oh, yeah, I want to talk to you about this guy that disappeared. And he's like, he's immediately suspicious because he sticks out like a sore thumb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And there's also, as soon as he lands, he runs into some issues where he gets into like the wrong cab. I mean, he knows it the whole time that they're trying to kidnap him. But yeah, I always think that scene is funny.
Well, it's such a great scene because it's like his first time we can actually see him like at work and how his mind thinks and how he has to constantly think one step ahead because he knows right away that they wouldn't have sent a car over for him and the car is there and it's like, oh, Mr. Bond, please this way. And he's like, oh, let me make a quick phone call. And he's just like, oh no, we didn't send a car. And so he already knows right away. He still gets in the car with the guy and he's able to interrogate the guy. And I always remember, even when I was a kid, I remember like the guy biting into the cigarette and it had cyanide. And I'm like, how would he bite a cigarette? Like I thought like if you bit the like a real cigarette, it would kill you.
No, yeah, isn't that funny? I mean, this is off topic, but the movie Signs, Joaquin Phoenix says that he almost gets puke in his mouth when kissing a girl, but he avoids it. He's like, I would have died if I got puke in my mouth. And I thought he meant that literally. I thought if you like swallowed puke at all, you would die. So, I guess it's just funny that you think that way. But
oh, that's true.
Huh? Oh,
no,
it's true.
I
should have been dead at the beginning of this podcast.
Oh wow. Okay.
But no, and see, this is a really great introduction to Sean Connery as James Bond. I think I don't have a favorite Bond, and I plan on ranking them by the time we do finish.
So you will be picking one by the end of the series.
I will be picking one by the end of the series. But Sean Connery definitely is, I will even say now, is one of the best. He just is so cool. And you can tell just from the look on his face that he is always one step ahead, always knows what's going on. He's always in control. And it's just cool, calm, collected.
What I like about him, which we'll kind of get into later, and this is just from going off of my memory, it may change as it goes on, but Roger Moore, I always remember being a lot more like comedic Bond type of thing. And just, he's a lot more, doesn't seem like he's taking anything too seriously. But so when he meets Honey Rider, and then when she gets kidnapped and they're like, oh, we're going to go torture her now. He kind of gets up and he gets like real angry. So, but I always preferred Sean Connery more than anybody. Like when you just say James Bond, I immediately think of Sean Connery, but I do like him because he's so calm. Like when certain situations, he's like you said, he could be real charming, and they do have like those bits of dry wit, which this movie is a lot more funnier than I remember it. Where because when you're a kid watching this, like dialogue just like goes over your head, or you miss a lot of those clever jokes. So when they do that, and like one scene he's being chased by a hearse and he gets the hearse off of a cliff and the hearse explodes, and the one guy, what happened? He's like, oh, I think he was on his way to a funeral.
Yeah, no, that one had me cracking up. No, and I agree. I there is something about like just like the adult jokes hidden in there. It's very sly, and I can appreciate that.
I was going to say real quick, did you know that Roger Moore was actually considered to be the first Bond?
Yeah, I heard about that. And do you know why they didn't pick him?
I think it was time constraints. Like he was on doing a TV show.
Well, but also they said he looked too young, which is funny because later on when he'd get picked, a lot of people would say he's too old.
I remember that, especially during the 80s, people were like, what is he doing still being Bond?
Yeah, a senior citizen, even though I think he was only like, he was like in his 60s. I think Daniel Craig is about there himself. So
Daniel Craig's in the 60s?
I don't think he's in his 60s. Hold on. I'm looking up his age.
A View to a Kill came out in 1985, and Roger Moore was 58 at the time. Wow.
And Daniel Craig is 54.
Okay. And spoilers, he's done.
Yeah. Oh no, he's done with it. And so, we'll have to see whoever they pick next.
Well,
they pick the 70-year-old.
It's different though. I mean, it like now, like people, they looked older, I think, back in the day. And Daniel Craig I'm sure had really strict training regimens and diets and made him look like he was a million times younger. But anyway, we're getting off track here. So but like I said, Sean Connery, that's who I imagine as Bond. And it would be kind of funny to think like Roger Moore being Bond for 20 plus years or whatever without any breaks.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, that wouldn't have happened. I mean, there's a reason they broke off pretty fast. I mean, these movies, he has a lot of movies he's in, but they're very rapid.
And another man in the running at the time was Cary Grant.
Really? How old was Cary Grant in 62?
Oh, he's probably the same age as Roger Moore. He would have been 58. Yeah. Same 58. Age. So.
The thing is Cary Grant was in movies in the late 50s, and he was looking older, but he was still looking good for his age.
They said he was such a big star, though, they can only get him to commit for one movie, and they wanted a star where they can get committed to at least a couple movies.
That's wild, because that's like, sequels weren't really in the talk like that much in those days. But I mean, this was a whole franchise, so they had to milk it.
They were banking on it being a franchise.
Mm-hmm. And I guess spoilers again, it is a franchise. Just to let you
It's a shame they only made the one movie.
They only made Dr.No. Yeah. Speaking of Dr.No, I want to say this little fact. Do you know what this movie was called in Japan?
I do not.
Okay, so it was still called Dr.No, but it's Doctor ? No with an exclamation. So Doctor? No, that's the title. And the tagline was, I have it written down, we don't want a doctor. So I said that's what it was called originally, but then they found out about it, and they went back and they made sure that the title was correct in Japan and everything. It was like marketed as a completely different movie.
Oh, so it was like a total translation error. So somebody translating it, it's like, oh, that's saying Dr.No, like doctor.
Yeah.
No.
Exactly. It was just a total mistranslation. It could have been a mess. And we'll talk about that. We've talked about on Godzilla how much James Bond movies just inspired even those movies. So
yeah, Eon stepped in and said, "Dr.No, thank you."
But yeah, so speaking of Dr.No, since we're talking about the title, how do you feel about this Bond villain, Dr.No?
So I did like him. There is a bit of mystery about him. Mm-hmm. The only thing I will say, they kind of tout him as this very brilliant silent scientist and everything, but there are so many instances he could have killed James Bond, like hundreds of times he could have killed him. And they even said, like, why did you let me live and bring me to this island? He said, oh, I wanted to see if you are as brilliant as you are. I wanted to see if you're able to compete with my mind. And, and I'm like, he's sitting right there. Just shoot him. You got a whole...
classic supervillain stuff. Like, just like toying with him. And just silly. But no, Dr.No, he's a fun villain. I'll say that. I don't think he's up there as like one of the most iconic ones, but he's kind of silly. He has like robot hands. I completely forgot about that characteristic about him. But reading just about the books. I've never read any of the James Bond books. I don't know if you have.
No.
Yeah. it sounds much sillier in the book. So we'll talk about it, but how James Bond escapes is completely different than how he escapes in the book. In the book, it's like an obstacle course that he has to go through that Dr. No puts him into, and he has to like there's like a squid that he has to dodge, and it sounded so bizarre. And I think maybe the silliness of Dr. No is some of that book feeding into that, but they had to change the obstacle course and everything. I think good idea. That sounds so far-fetched.
Well, yeah, because that reminds me of, and I don't know if you've seen any of these movies. We may have to talk about that at some point, but like the In Like Flint or Our Man Flint, like those movies.
I know of them. I've seen them.
Which they're kind of like parody, not like full-on parodies like Airplane or whatever, but it's a lot of tropes from spy movies. And that's kind of like the joke. Like it's really self-aware. And that they have really ridiculous plots like that, where like the guy puts them in like really elaborate things when he could just easily just shoot them, because
that's just how it goes. That's just what you do as a villain. You got to torture. You can't just kill.
Well, yeah, like so Bond shows up, like there's a fire tank that could have shot Bond.
That all the locals think is a dragon, which I think plays a little too hard on the trope that the locals are like really stupid or something. That they're like, oh, there's a dragon out there. You can't go out there, when it's quite obviously just a really crappily made tank with a face.
Well, I don't know if that's so much of the locals being ignorant or whatever. I think that's more of like, because they say like they didn't know, none of the locals would go to Crab Key at all. They wouldn't go to the island. So I'm assuming like maybe from like a distance for a boat, like they probably saw flames shooting out. So they probably
just stayed away.
Just like, oh, that must be a dragon. I see flames shooting. But so I don't think they actually saw the tank or whatever. And that's the other thing too. They build up this tank as like a big deal. It's only in there for one scene. And I thought they would at least come back to it at some point and be like, oh, like send the tank after Bond so he doesn't escape or whatever.
Yeah,
but it's
or
like, oh,
Bond escapes with it. That's something he would do in the later movies.
Sure.
Yeah.
But never gets brought up again. I guess it was just too expensive.
Yeah. It kills one dude, and then they get out and they're like, all right, James, you're coming with us. And Honey Rider, who shows up just a little bit, like just a little close to an hour into this movie, the Bond girl everybody remembers.
If we're going to talk about iconic scenes, like the James Bond opening where he introduces himself for the first time, and this scene in particular, it's like it goes hand in hand with Bond scenes where Honey Rider comes out of the ocean and she's got the bikini on, and that was like a poster on like a lot of people's walls, I think, at the time. So
well, and it like really kickstarted the bikini. I guess that was just starting out as a fashion thing, and she really like launched that. Honey Rider, played by like the name Ursula Andress, and she is she's great. She's great. She's got the look. She's in the bikini. She's got the seashells, and I guess she's dubbed as well in this movie, which the dubbing was done well. I didn't realize until I read it after.
Right. Well, she has a really thick European accent in real life, and they interviewed her, and she was married to John Derek at the time, the guy who would later go on and marry Bo Derek, and he directed a lot of Bo Derek's movies. But I forget where they said they saw her, but I think they saw her like in an ad or something like that, and they just immediately offered her the part. And they said Kirk Douglas was the one to convince her to take this role
out of all the people.
Yeah, he's like, no, you got to do it. It's going to be great. And
what a good influence, I guess.
She had a real thick accent. They said they just wanted something with a real slight accent. And they but yeah, she gets asked questions all the time. Say People still ask her about James Bond to this day. And she's actually in, which I don't know if we'll cover it, she's actually in the James Bond parody movie Casino Royale as well.
I'd love to cover that. So
Yeah,
we'll definitely go into that.
Sure. And but yeah, this was her first movie, and then this kind of like launched her career.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Heck, there's a scene later on, so they get radiated, and they go through like when after Dr.No kidnaps them, and they have to do a wash down, like in a shower, which is a scene like in Austin Powers when he wakes up out of ice. But I could imagine. So she is completely naked behind that screen. Young men in the audience watching this movie are probably going crazy. And like, there's a scene where, I mean, she's obviously now, I'm watching it in HD. She's wearing like a skin colored bikini or whatever, but pixelated like crap back in the day. There were rumors going around that you could see it if you looked really closely when you're watching on your crappy VHS tape. But now it's ruined.
So you were freeze framing and slow moing it down and everything.
Yes. Yeah, and then when you returned it to the video store, they would see what moment you had it freeze framed on.
It's like, let's see where this guy.
Let's see where this freak ended it on.
Yeah. No, I yeah, you could see clearly she's wearing some type of skin-colored bikini or whatever, but
Sean Connery is topless, and I love it that scene because he's just showering. He's just like he's just rubbing his body, taking it in.
You got to wash the radiation off.
Yeah. I'm glad it's that easy because whatever numbers they were throwing out, it was really high, like a really high amount of radiation.
They're like, okay, they're at 80. 40, 38, 32, 8, and they have no more radiation.
Yeah, they're done. Wow, you guys are clean.
Anyway, the relationship between Ursula and Sean Connery, they said they had a really great relationship. Nothing. They were great friends, and Ursula said that Sean Connery would call her up every now and then, and they would still have really great talks together. And
that's nice.
She considered him a lifelong friend.
That's awesome. That's really, you can tell, this movie's kind of bookended with two like slow moments, the slow investigative part. And then once they get captured, it's kind of a slow move into the escape. It does feel a little helpless there for a little bit. They're at the dinner table. Dr.No talks to them. And when James Bond tries to escape, it's really long and drawn out.
I gotta say though, James Bond was a little too trusting of this guy at some points. Like so after they take the shower, they put him into a room and there's drinks for them. They're like, oh yeah, let's have some coffee, yes. And they drink it, and of course it's drugged, and they just pass out. And again, Dr. No could have easily just shot him. He was lying on the floor unconscious,
or put poison in there and just kill him that way. Yeah, no, I thought the same thing. I was like, okay, so James Bond knew the guy at the airport was a trap, but he didn't know the drink was the most common way to like to drug somebody. I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
One scene that I thought was that I noticed, because they made like a big deal about it, or like they kind of paused where Dr. No was showing them around his lair, and James Bond kind of stops and looks at a painting, like kind of like a double take, like, huh? And I didn't know what that was about. I was like, I don't know, I don't get what they're referencing. And they actually said in the commentary that painting at one point was stolen, and it was missing. And that was implying that Dr. No was the one that stole it.
Yeah. I guess it went painting or went missing very recently before this movie came out. Speaking of commentaries, I guess I wanted to get into a little, because we both listen to commentaries, but I think we listened to different ones. I'm not sure. So mine had a bunch of interviews with like the director, some of the producers, a writer, and it would just constantly be like Terrence Young, and then they would say something. I don't know if yours is similar.
So did they do that where it was just they just said the guy's name or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. They just said the guy's name, and then they would put in the line, and then they'd say whoever the next guy's name is, and just they talk. The commentary is weird.
I think we kind of listened to the same thing, because mine was like that too, but it was like a guy introing each person, but they were kind of explaining, like, Terrence Young explains the complexities of shooting this scene, or Ursula Anders explains what she thought of the movie, or that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Sometimes they would do that, but not a lot. So the one that I'm talking about is from the Criterion Collection from way back in the day, and it's banned, supposedly. They didn't want anything to do with it. I wonder if they took pieces of that and then just reworked it.
Yeah, but I will say, and it was kind of all over the place, and it was really hard for me to kind of stay connected to it, because it would just jump back and forth between, like, I don't know, like it felt like almost 10 people they were talking to, because it's a bunch of interviews from what these people did for the movie, and they just kind of put them into the movie during these certain points. So it doesn't flow great.
No, it doesn't. I don't think the commentary I listened to is very good. I didn't honestly get a lot out of it. And I would like to listen to the other ones, and hopefully, I'm sure they do get better. But yeah, the ones I listened to in particular, I wasn't too crazy about. I wouldn't really recommend going out and listening to it. There's not even really on because you have the box set. Was there any good making ofs or anything?
Yeah, what I was actually going to say, there is a 40-minute documentary explaining the making of Dr.No, and there's one explaining the locations that they use. There's another documentary explaining the weapons of James Bond. So, I mean, there's probably like a good 2 hours of extra material if you really wanted to watch that. So, I mean, if you're a Bond head, I mean, you've probably either seen it or whatever, but it's definitely something, I would say check out. That was one big point that everybody made. Sean Connery made the point, cast and crew, that a lot of James Bond's mannerisms, his style, his look was all based off of Terrence Young.
Oh,
like
wow,
they said Terrence Young was always like a real stylish type of guy. He always came in like wearing like real fashionable suits, and that's, he took Sean Connery to like, and he was there like during like the whole fitting process of Sean Connery getting fit for like his iconic suits. Mm-hmm. So they said like if Terrence Young was an actor, he would have been perfect to play Bond.
That's a while, but I guess he just preferred to stay behind the camera.
Right. It was kind of funny. Like I said, like Sean Connery is like, he'd worked a lot with Terrence Young to get the part right, and Terrence Young gave him a lot of feedback, and they said it was like, any credit to that character working, it's Terrence Young that brought that character to life.
That's really cool. I like that. And I mean, he was the one to shape those movies. He directed this From Russia with Love and Thunderball, some of the most iconic movies of the franchise. So he definitely molded it.
There wouldn't be any future Bond movies without him. I would. So
yeah.
But I think we could sit here and talk about the plot, but it's such an iconic movie. We could talk about James Bond all day, really. And
yeah,
I don't really, and I feel like it's such a common movie too, that I think if you're a big Bond head, you've probably seen it already. Or if this is kind of like, if this is going to get you to watch the movie, maybe this podcast, then I definitely don't want to give away too much of what's happening, because I think it's one of those movies you really have to immerse yourself with, as all the movies go, really.
Yeah, definitely check this one out. It's really good, and like you said, I don't want to give away the ending, because I do really like the escape and everything it builds up to. So yeah, no, Dr.No is really awesome. It really is. It's iconic, and yeah, I'm really excited to get into the rest of these movies.
Right, and that, as we said, this is kind of like a small budget movie. So they start out really small, and they definitely work their way up, and Bond becomes a lot more globe-trotting, lots of different locations and action sequences. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what's coming next.
Yeah, me too. But speaking of what's coming next, what's coming up on Thursday?
Well, since you're doing your special retrospective for James Bond, we're going to continue mine. We're going to go back into the Toho. Well, we took a month off for Burt Reynolds, but we're getting back into it. and we're going to go with Invasion of the Astro Monster, and that is available on pretty much everywhere. It's available on Tubi. It's available on HBO Max. YouTube has the HD copy. It's completely
like
free.
Yeah,
It's everywhere. You can easily find it.
Well, cool. Well, I'm really excited to watch that one. And if you want to recommend us anything, be sure to shoot us an email over at driveindoublefeaturpodcast@gmail.com and follow us over on Twitter at DIDFpod. But until next time.
Until next time.